Our next guest is Governor Spencer Cox of Utah. He's also vice chair of the National Governors Association. We hope to get him here in person, but I was happy to sit down with him yesterday to discuss how Utah is working to get students back on track. Take a listen. Governor Cox, thanks for joining us.
You're very welcome. We're excited to be together. Thank you.
Okay, well, data on pandemic learning, including new data from the National Assessment of Education Progress, shows we're not making much progress. We're actually going back. Students are struggling across the board, math and reading. What's your reaction to this so-called report card, which is not good, and what is Utah doing about it?
Well, I don't think it was any surprise to people that pay close attention to education and certainly what happened during the pandemic. We knew in the moment that having kids out of school would not be good for their progress. And so Utah was one of the first states, and I give all the credit to our teachers, to parents, students who sacrifice so much, our public health officials who work to get kids back in school. We were one of the first states to do that. And if you look at those new reports and those new report cards, if there's any silver lining, at least for our state, is that we didn't fall as much as other states. We were the only state without a statistically significant decline in science scores. Now, that being said, this is not a victory lap in any way, because we're still well below where I think most of us hoped we would be. And so we've done several things that I think will make a difference. In fact, I know they'll make a difference. One is just looking at our at-risk kids. So we jumped in very quickly to figure out which kids were struggling the most, who was the most behind, and how can we get additional resources there. We've been working with the legislature on funding mechanisms to make that happen, and so we are now getting extra help for those kids. That's the biggest piece of our focus. So kind of K through 12, who's behind, and let's not let them get more behind. Let's get them additional resources to catch up. We've also been working on reading. Reading is just so important. You mentioned math and reading. We believe that reading by third grade is maybe the most important indicator of a child's success. And so this last session, that's really legislative session, that's been our biggest focus. We've been working with legislators. We passed a new bill specifically focused on third grade reading.
You mentioned trying to help the kids who need it most. This report card found certainly kids that were affected the most were low income and students of color. Is that the same in your state?
Yes, yeah, it is the same for sure. Again, one of the reasons we were a little more successful is we had been working well before the pandemic to get technology resources in the hands of all of our students. So most of our schools, regardless of socioeconomic status, had access to devices. So we had Chromebooks or iPads available for almost all of our students, which allowed us to pivot very quickly into digital learning. But we know that was just a stopgap, and so getting kids back in school as quickly as possible made a huge difference. But what we did find was that kids who had less access to resources and parents who could be there with them during the pandemic and could help, they struggled the most, and disproportionately that fell on our minority population, our multicultural students, those that our rural students, those at a lower socioeconomic class, and so that's where our focus has been when it comes to funding.
Governor, I've got 3 kids, and during the pandemic, our house was a little cramped, and now they're all back in the classroom, and that's great. But do you get a sense from some, or just a feeling of, okay, now we're back in the classroom, everything's good, and do you have to combat that to say, no, we lost a lot of education in these couple of years, and we've got to make sure we fix it going forward?
Sure. Look, I was in the same boat. My kids are a little older, but I still had 2 in public schools. I had one in middle school and one in high school, and they struggled as well. And so we experienced it firsthand as a family. I'm actually not getting the sense that kind of everything's okay. I've been traveling throughout the state. Just yesterday, I met with teachers and students in Utah County here in our state, and and we were talking about the issues that they're facing. I have a brother who's a high school counselor, also teaches reading and is learning that these kids are struggling. He's seeing a difference, and it's been problematic. And so nobody is resting on their laurels, if there were any to rest on. Really focused on making sure that we're helping these kids get back to where they need to be. And I want to be very clear about this. I mean, if you looked at the numbers before the pandemic, they weren't great, right? That's one of the issues. That's why this third grade literacy program that we are focused on right now, and we're hiring instructional coaches all across the state. We're really trying to get to kids earlier. We know that if we can help them in pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, their odds of being successful, not just in school, but after school, and avoiding some of the terrible tragedies that happen when we don't have an appropriate education. That's got to be the focus. And the good news is that across the board, we're seeing educators and school districts that are committed to making that happen.
Certainly in Washington, everyone's talking about money and can we pay for it? And with the passage of COVID funds, money is really not the issue here. It's how you spend it. So how do you go through that decision-making process to make sure you're maximizing the money you have?
Yeah, that's something we're trying to get better at. And by the way, I feel like we're better at it than other states only because money has always been a problem for us here in Utah. We have two challenges. One, we're the youngest state in the nation, and we have more kids per capita than any other state. And two, about 2/3 of the land in our state is owned by the federal government. These are public lands, and the federal government doesn't pay taxes on those lands. So we've always struggled with funding and had to be very careful about the way that we prioritize our funding to get the most good out of it. So when we look at these new sources of funding, and again, I have to give credit to our legislature who's worked very hard in distributing these funds. The funds that went directly to schools, we have school boards and school employees that are trying to maximize their use of the funds that are available. But we're really looking at evidence-informed and evidence-based instruction. So the programs, the materials, collaborations that are happening with our Science of Reading panel, that matters because historically we haven't done enough of that. It's just who had the best lobbyist, and where you could convince a principal somewhere to buy this new thing that was going to solve everything, and that's just not the case. We have to be looking at evidence-based programs. What is working? How do we scale that? How do we get it out to all of our schools? Which schools are struggling the most? And we have some really exciting projects that are happening in our schools. And so I just want to give one piece of this though that is really important to me, and that is teachers. I don't care if we run an experiment and we have two identical children, and you let me choose the teacher and I let you choose everything else. You can choose the technology, you can choose the curriculum, you can choose the school they go to. I'm going to win every time because there is nothing more important to the input of learning than our teachers. And we have a teacher shortage in our country today. And I think part of that teacher shortage is because we're not paying our teachers enough. And so that's something we've been really focused on here in Utah, is increasing teacher pay so that we can keep the best teachers and so that we can inspire a new generation of teachers to come in and carry on that wonderful legacy. But we can't do that if we're not paying them enough, especially when we've got inflation north of 10%.
You're a leader with the National Governors Association. You talked about collaboration. Do you learn, consult with other governors and states and see what they're doing and say, hey, mate, that's not a bad idea?
Yeah, we absolutely do. There's no question. I believe that that our nation was set up intentionally so that we would have 50 different laboratories of democracy, 50 different places to experiment and to learn from each other. And I think it's a foolish leader and a foolish governor indeed who is not interested in what's happening in other states. I'm grateful that we have the National Governors Association to bring us all together to talk about these things. We have researchers in education. I can send a text, an email. I can make a phone call today and learn from them what's happening in other states. We talk as governors often. I'll be very blunt, and I want to give credit where it's due. Our K through 3 literacy program that we're working on right now is really based off of some excellent work that happened in Mississippi that their state has been piloting for a couple of years. They've seen significant increases. We've set some very big goals. Currently, about 46% of our third graders are where we think they need to be, and we think we can get to 70% of third graders being where they should be, above grade level by 2027 because of what we've learned from Mississippi and some other states. And I certainly hope that people will copy the things that we're doing right.
Obviously, all parents want their kids to get the best education they can, but if we just pull back a little bit, what are the stakes here? I mean, the U.S. has an aging population. There's rising tension with China. What are the stakes for us? With parents, obviously, very important. Kids getting the education, but really, what does this mean for the nation to be ready for the next generation?
Well, I don't think the stakes have ever been higher. I mean, honestly, just because of the way the world works today. This is a global society. It's a global economy. The world is smaller than ever before because of our ability to travel and communicate in ways that generations before us never would have imagined. We're having this interview, and I'm sitting in my office in Utah, and so we're not just competing with each other. We're competing with China. We're competing with Europe. We're competing with other countries, and sadly, we're not doing as well as we have in the past. And we know we can do better. There's a lot of bad news for sure, but there's some good news coming out of the pandemic as well. And I think it's important that we focus on that. We were able to pivot very quickly. We saw teachers that were creative and resilient and used technology in new and fascinating ways. We saw our kids and parents again realize that they can do the hard stuff. But we need more of that resiliency. I'm very worried about what's happening with mental health in our schools with our young people. If you look at some of the numbers right now, they're devastating, and so that's an area where we're focusing on as well. But we have to do this. We have to take the politics out of it. This should not be a Republican thing, a Democratic thing. We should be coming together to support our teachers, support our schools, and help make sure that the next generation will be even better than the current generation, because the world needs a strong United States, and that only happens if we have a strong and educated populace.
I want to pick up that as a follow-up. Just education used to be more of a bipartisan, certainly initiatives in Washington, bills would pass, large majorities, and obviously COVID came along and it's so divisive now. How do you get there? How do you get the politics out in the wake of this anger that you're seeing, and education is kind of caught in the middle?
Yeah, well, to me, trust is the currency of governing, and trust is the currency of education too, in some senses. And so we have to make sure that we're constantly working to engender that trust. One thing we can do is to be a little more careful as politicians in the way that we talk about our schools. Again, we talk about our educators, that we're not undermining them. I have deep concern when I was studying in college, we were taught that all politics is local. It feels like all politics is national now. Mm-hmm. And if something happens in a classroom in California or Virginia, everybody assumes it's happening in a classroom in Utah. And so we have to work as leaders to dispel that type of misinformation, to bring parents on board. We also have to include families, and that's something that not everyone has done well. School should be about supporting children and parents absolutely have to have input into their child's education. And here's the thing, Bob, I don't know a teacher in the world who doesn't want more more parent participation. They really do want parents involved. That makes their job easier. It makes their child's education more formative. And so I always encourage parents to get more involved, have conversations with your teachers. But we have to get away from this name calling and misinformation. I've seen parents come in and yell at kindergarten teachers for teaching them things that just aren't happening. I mean, they're trying to learn their alphabet, but they've heard something on social media or on cable news that has led them to believe that there's something happening that is not. And so we really do need responsible leaders and responsible parents to step up as well. Most families love their schools and love their teachers. I think there's an exhausted majority out there, and that exhausted majority needs to be speaking up and talking about the good things that are happening. Let's not have this race to the bottom where we're so excited to share the one negative story when there are thousands and thousands of positive stories every day that our teachers are doing good things and our kids are learning and parents are involved, and that's the way the system should work.
Yeah, I think that's a great last point, that you see a lot of stuff on social media and you think the tension that teachers and parents are always fighting, and yes, some are, but most aren't. Governor Spencer Cox, really appreciate you taking the time on this important issue. I love your insights. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.